The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
Giles and the Goalie Podcast. I am your co-host, Giles Farrell. I do that every time, and it's not intentional, I swear.
I don't care.
And here is my other co-host, Ben Remington.
Hello.
We're in the Burnsville studios.
Egan studios. Wrong, South Metro City.
Whoops.
Close enough.
My bad.
Yeah.
Egan Studios, we have a captive audience not paying attention to us, and we also have animals that may or may not make their voices heard during the duration of the show. So fair warning to those of you listening in. We have just a little bit to go over, so it might be a little shorter than usual podcast, as haven't had too much happen between the end of the Stanley Cup final and today as we record. And we had a later than usual podcast last week for you to digest on. So not a whole lot of news overly Wild related, but we can kind of go over our off-season expectations this week, as we are now officially underway in the NHL off-season, and also the NHL draft. This is our pre-NHL draft podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can kind of go over what we would expect from the Wild at that. Maybe, at the very least, not going off the board with a fourth-round projected defenseman in the first round, but I digress. So yeah, just a brief rundown of what you can expect from this otherwise fine production here as we record on a lovely Saturday afternoon, a rare Saturday edition of the Giles and the Goalie Podcast, as we record pre-Joe Mauer Day.
Yeah, that's gonna be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to see how the crowd reacts to Mauer, because I think that there is a lot of, I don't want to say bad blood, but there's a lot of people that were D-bags about Mauer in his final years here, especially. And I think it'll be nice. I think it'll be overwhelmingly positive, and I'm looking forward to that, because there's a lot of folks out there that were Mauer haters for a long time. Even when he was good, they didn't appreciate him. So I'm very much looking forward to Mauer finally getting, the day that he really deserves. He got it a little bit on the last day of the season last year when we were there. But really looking forward to a Mauer love fest, because that's one guy that didn't get probably as much love as he should have during his time here.
I think it'll be more favorable for him. I think basically the stadium will be full of Mauer appreciative people. I think people who only appreciated him for what he was and thought he was really good for what it was will be at the ballpark later this afternoon and give him his rightfully deserved number retirement, and all the appropriate accolades after that. But that's very briefly our Joe Mauer thoughts, as we've shared time and time again before. But as we said, Minnesota Wild are underway in the off-season now. We have Crazy Pills Paul Fenton leading the charge for now his second off-season at the helm of the Minnesota Wild. Is he going to be Captain Smith and take us dead on into an iceberg like the Titanic? Is that what we're expecting here this off-season?
Well, fun fact, if the Titanic would have rammed the iceberg head-on, it would not have sunk. But the fact they tried to steer to avoid it is what caused the gash along the side that opened up more compartments to water, and that's why it sunk.
So
if you're ever in doubt, just ram it. That's what I'm saying here.
Okay, so definitely not the approach Paul Fenton would take.
Right. No, I thought it was interesting. They had a press conference with him this week, or not a press conference. I don't know. He had a sit down with medias. Yeah, he sit down with media.
You know, he loves those.
Right, and the thing that I found most interesting was he said, they asked him about the draft, of course, and he said we're taking best player available. And it just like I don't know. I don't know if it's a lack of self-awareness thing, or if he still, to this moment, legitimately believes that Philip Johansson was the best player available at that time. He probably does, and maybe credit to him a little bit for sticking to his guns there. But to come out and say we're taking the best player available, and it's just like, well, first of all, yeah, no S, Sherlock. Number two, that just, again, it opens you up to a lot of criticism on the pick that you very much fumbled last year. And I don't know. I would like him to be aware that he fumbled that pick. You know what I mean? Like, I want him to be like, yeah, we trusted our scouts and we fired those guys now, because there's been plenty of turnover. There's plenty of people that you can throw under the bus at this point if you're him. And maybe he doesn't want to do that, and maybe that is admirable to a point. But it was still weird. That quote was still weird to me, and obviously was kind of a punchline more than anything.
Yeah, and the other thing was he was very adamant that Jared Spurgeon wanted to be re-signed. He wanted to re-sign Jared Spurgeon, and I think the feeling is mutual by the player, although apparently we saw last week that there hasn't been any discussion between agent and general manager about said player, so remains to be seen. Technically, he can't be re-signed to a contract until July 1st to give it an extension under the rules. But you can agree to the deal beforehand. You don't have to wait for July 1 to start talking. I think that's a misconception because of what the Ottawa Senators did a year ago or 2 years ago. Yeah, last year with Matt Duchene, where they never really even talked to him before July 1 hit because they said that they couldn't. And no, that's not true. You can talk to him. You just can't sign the extension until July 1. And many players have agreed to a deal prior to that deadline. They just can't put the pen to paper until July 1. So just putting that out there. That was really the only takeaway from that. I mean, the guy just gives the standard company line, and honestly, he wants to be anywhere but in front of a camera. I think he'd rather be vacationing in North Korea than standing in front of a camera talking to the media for all I care. But what is the biggest off-season need for this team? As I don't know if he actually maybe addressed that, but then again, I've kind of gotten good at tuning him out because whatever he says just make my blood pressure spike.
Yeah, and you can't necessarily believe what he says either. The whole Zucker situation, he talked about that and said, unfortunately it got out that we had conversations with some teams. Well, conversations is one thing. I'm sure you have conversations as a general manager every day with other teams. You should. That's your job. But the fact that you've got deals that are legitimately agreed upon, but, in the instance of the trade deadline, if something was fumbled. In the instance of the Kessel trade, Kessel vetoed it. This is beyond conversations, Paul. We're all adults here. It insults our intelligence. And that's what bothers me about, the way that he's done business so far in Minnesota is that, saying that, is that the most PC answer? Is that the most company line softening the blow answer that he can think of? Sure. But it insults our intelligence. It insults the work that Michael Russo does, getting, the details obviously from other sources, not Paul Fenton, because let's not be ridiculous. But, it just, that kind of stuff. And with the whole Spurgeon thing, it's how many contracts are agreed upon before July 1st? Oh, I don't know. Only half of UFA contracts are agreed to before July 1st? Let's not dick around. That just doesn't make any sense. It's just silly at this point.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's actually talked to Zucker. I don't know if that was something that he mentioned in his little media scrum, but at some point, at what point do you just reach out to the player and say, I effed up here. Like, I'm sorry. Like, at some point, you just gotta swallow your damn pride and, take the L. Yeah. Like, don't try to dick around it. Don't dick the player around. Don't dick the fans around. Like, that's just, as you said, it's insulting to all of us that, this is the way it is. But, remains to be seen where Jason Zucker goes. I saw maybe Buffalo maybe has cropped up now as a candidate for Jason Zucker. The Red Phone still alive and active. I still think the Vancouver Canucks are a little bit of a dark horse for him. I think they really could use a good left winger to complement Brock Besser, as I talked about on last week's podcast. So, keep your eye out on them. Remains to be seen if, the Wild can get a good return from Vancouver. I mean, it remains to be seen if they can get a good return on anyone, because they're going to sell them for pennies on the dollar at this point. My only hope is if they get a trade with Buffalo, a certain player comes in return from the University of Minnesota. But I digress.
Yeah, getting back to your question about the team needs, I think that's an important question because I think that nobody really has their finger on that just yet, because you feel like this team can improve in a lot of areas, but it's not super deficient in a lot of areas. Like, yeah, you definitely need scoring. I mean, that's been the story of the Minnesota Wild since 1999. They need scoring. And so I think that's kind of a given. And so that makes the whole Zucker trade even more perplexing, but again, we digress. I think you're fine on defense, and then that's something that has certainly come up as trading away defense because you have a little bit of a strength there. I don't know that you're so strong there that you have to trade someone, because you traded Jared Spurgeon, you traded Jonas Brodin, you're slotting guys like Greg Pateryn or Nick Seeler into the top four, and that's not awful, but it turns your defense from a strength into just kind of a middle ground. You go from a top 10 defensive unit pretty easily, maybe even a top 5 defensive unit in the league, to somewhere in that middle third. I don't know that anything's going to change with goaltending, but I think that you would like to improve goaltending some way, somehow. Again, it goes back to something that I felt was the worst move Paul Fenton made all season long, was extending Alex Stalock. It was the least defensible move he made. And I'm sure the Nino trade was terrible, and I'm not saying it wasn't. But at least at the time you could defend it a little bit and say, they did need a center. Nino hadn't really thrived here. You can make arguments. The Alex Stalock extension, you have zero argument. Zero. And maybe it didn't affect this team as adversely as the Nino trade did, but again, there was zero defense of that deal. And now here you are, you're stuck with Dubnyk and Stalock, and Dubnyk had a down year, and you don't know what kind of year he's going to have this year, and you have no one to push him. I mean, Alex Stalock, again, we love the guy, and he's a model Minnesotan citizen. That's wonderful. But
he owns a horse.
Yeah. But you need to improve. You need to improve your goaltending. Like, you need to improve your backup goaltending. And again, call me crazy, but maybe if you have a good backup, they can push your, bona fide starter to higher levels. And I'm not saying that Devan Dubnyk is suddenly going to become a Vezina winner if he has a good backup, but it's not something that hurts. Yeah, like, how many teams have made deep runs in the playoffs because they kind of have a 1A, 1B goalie situation? Mm-hmm. We saw that in Boston this year. Halak had a heck of a season as a backup. And maybe it kind of pushed Tuukka Rask a little bit. He had a phenomenal season. And certainly Jake Allen isn't pushing anybody because he's ass. But, Jordan Binnington had to earn his playing time. And there's something to be said for having two goalies that you can trust to start an NHL game on your roster. And, again, I'm sorry, but I don't feel like they have that right now.
Just for you, when the Stanley Cup gets engraved with the St. Louis Blues, I'm going to take the photo of it that gets tweeted out. I'm going to Photoshop it and just instead of having Jake Allen where his name is, I'm going to just put ass. I'm going to just engrave ass into that spot for you. You can make that your Twitter cover photo.
He's got a ring now. It's just, there is no God.
Yeah, life is cruel.
Yeah.
I still am going to say, like, scoring is absolutely front and center, the crux of this team's problems. And I wrote about it again this week at Zone Coverage about this is a huge problem that, was made, I think, even worse with the trades that were made mid-season. And this is not a problem that's going to be easily fixed. And you are relying on your young players like Luke Cunnin, Ryan Donato, Kevin Fiala, Yul Eriksson, Jordan Greenway to step up and, fill these holes that have now been made on the roster from, Granlund, Coyle, and Niederreiter, who were, at least Coyle and Niederreiter were 40-plus point guys, and Granlund was, in the last couple seasons, a 60-plus point guy. Mm-hmm. You're replacing a lot of scoring with a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. And if these guys don't pan out and you trade, Jason Zucker, who's now scoring at least 20 goals annually, he has the potential to score 30, which he did 2 years ago. For pennies on the dollar, you're trading him for the likes of like Michael Frolik or whatever kind of flaming dog poop bag comes back. You're now making another huge gamble on your roster. And I put, if this doesn't pan out, like if the young players don't pan out, then you're relying on trades, which Paul Fenton doesn't give us any hope for making a good trade to get some kind of like player in return. Donato might be the only exception. And you have to basically go through the draft to find your scores, and that's going to take you several years to do, because in the NHL, you don't draft and the player instantly comes into the league unless you're drafting one overall. Like, that's just not how it goes. You take the player for a couple years at least, and they develop whatever junior college or European league they're in, and they need time. And if the Wild don't have an immediate fix to this problem, there's quite a chance that it's going to be a couple years where the Wild are going to rank in the bottom half of the league, if not the bottom third of the league in scoring, which is terrifying because they have a truly exceptional defense at suppressing shots in front of the net. And, more to your point, you should strengthen the goaltending because the Wild have this great defense that keeps the puck out of the high danger areas. And not having any kind of scoring to back that up is just completely maddening. And I think also I didn't put this in there, but something also at play is the hope that Kirill Kaprizov comes over next year, which is a huge roll of the dice. And, if he comes over, he's also a little bit of an unknown. Like, we've seen the highlights of him. He's got great skill. It's just getting that applied to the NHL level. That's a little bit of an unknown. Nothing is guaranteed unless you're Connor McDavid or Alex Ovechkin, coming over. That's a huge problem for me going into the offseason. And I worry about, I don't even care about like the left shot, right shot stuff. It's just finding quality players to score. And as you said, that's been the crux of the Wild problem since, the franchise has been founded. Marian Gaborik was the only, really goal scorer that this team's ever had.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point with the Kaprizov situation, not only is he unknown, if he comes here and if he plays here, like that's such a wild card. He's such a wild card above and beyond the fact that he might not even come here. He might not even play here. Like, it's not guaranteed at all. He could be happier than hell playing at home in Russia.
Who's happier than hell right now is Brett Hall, man. That dude is just out here living his best life, like with a blood alcohol level of 0.75.
He is well above the legal limit. But with Kaprizov, it's like we just saw Phil Kessel veto a trade here. What's to say Kirill Kaprizov wants to control his destiny? We saw it kind of last year with Ilya Kovalchuk. There was a little bit of a sweepstakes, or 2 years ago, I should say, where the Devils still controlled his rights and he didn't come back because whatever demands weren't met. Kaprizov can totally do that. He can totally do that. He can be like, yeah, you know what? This Minnesota roster just doesn't look good for me, for my development as a professional hockey player, and I want to win, or I want to be surrounded with some elite talent. I need somebody to feed me the puck, and you guys just don't have that. Or he can say he can play the whole small market card. I don't want to play in flyover country. I want to be in New York. I want to be in Boston or Philly or a big Canadian market. He can totally play those cards, and he's well within his rights to, because he holds the power. He holds the control here. And imagine like that's your backup plan right now. That's your plan for getting a score on this team, is praying to God that Kirill Kaprizov decides to sign here next summer. And what if that falls through?
This is my concern now. Is I thought about this week, that it's been kind of reported a little bit that agents are kind of telling their players don't go to Minnesota, as we found out in the Kessel trade. Something seems to kind of stink in the water here, essentially. The water that we put on our ice. And if this is the case, what if Kirill Kaprizov's agent just gets in his ear and says, if you want to go to the NHL, that's fine, but maybe if you want to win, don't necessarily go to Minnesota. But
right.
The key is he could come to Minnesota and he could instantly be the star player. He would instantly be that guy on this team. And, that's a lot of pressure, but, I think that is appealing for him. And I think that's something, that should be pitched to him, if it hasn't been already, by Paul Fenton and Craig Leopold. Like, you come over here, like, you're going to be our star. We are going to build around you. And if they haven't done that, then, shame on them. But I think that has to be a huge, huge pitch, because if not, then, you've got, an agent saying, hey, maybe, if you want to go somewhere else in the NHL. You don't have to go to Minnesota. You can just say, I'll never play there. And, they can just easily trade your rights, and they can just easily come out and say that, and then that puts the Wild in a bind, and then they trade him for nothing, and then he goes to whatever team he plays for, and he becomes a superstar. That's how it always works. So that's my biggest fear, and it's something I worry is going to come closer to reality, as we kind of see what happens here in this offseason, if indeed agents are kind of saying don't go to Minnesota. It's not a pretty situation, and you just wonder how much of that has to do with, what Paul Fenton is doing here. Is this... You didn't have this problem with Chuck Fletcher. Whether, you like Chuck Fletcher or not, you didn't have this problem. Free agents did want to come here. People did want to sign in Minnesota. There was a genuine interest because there was a good team, and, yeah, the team didn't work out, but people wanted to come here. Mm. And now we're shifting into a place where people don't necessarily want to come here anymore. And if that's the case, then free agency is going to be really rough for the Wild. And they might not get, really any free agents of note. And if that's the case, then you're looking at the same roster that we saw at the end of last year going into next year. And then scoring problems crop right back up. And we might be stuck with this for a couple of years, truthfully, if not, getting worse.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with off-season expectations. And then, as we kind of sit here, we talk about the NHL draft is next weekend. And I think the Wild do have to start addressing, forwards that have offensive game-breaking abilities. I think you've passed the point of going with best player available. The prospect cupboard is completely bare. I think you have to kind of go with a high-risk, high-reward player, and I don't know who that is, truthfully. I haven't gotten into the draft coverage as of yet, as I've been trying to just pile through my year-end player reviews on zone coverage. But this week I'll try to maybe outline a few players who the Wild should target that kind of fit that mold. But I think you are past the point of just saying, yeah, we are at, best player available. Nope. You need to start selecting forwards who have the potential to be game-breaking forwards, especially if you're going to be missing the playoffs and you are in the upper, third of the league in draft picks. There will be a forward there that has that potential. They might have a few more flaws than not, but you've got to take that chance, and that's what the Wild have to do, in my opinion. They can't go off the board with a defenseman again, or even just picking a defenseman again, in my opinion. I think you have to go forward, and I think, a lot of what they did last year, outside of the first-round pick was very good. So hopefully there's more of that coming in this next draft, but you don't know because it's Crazy Pills Paul. And, maybe he could wake up on the wrong side of the bed on Friday when it comes to draft day, and then he just completely swings and misses on another first-rounder. You don't know.
Yeah. So you do draft coverage even though you've never seen any of these prospects in person. How are we supposed to trust your coverage at all? That doesn't sound like anything I want to read.
Yeah, I don't know.
Inside joke.
I try to leave the draft coverage to the people who do actually see that, but the basic gist of the players, pretty well known, so I can kind of identify those.
And that's, I did a little bit of draft coverage last year, and my article right before the draft that actually went out the day of the draft was the Wild need a home run. And that's kind of more what you're talking about, is that, they need to take a chance on somebody with some real elite upside. They did it with Kirill Kaprizov. He was a fifth-round pick. And I think that was just kind of a product of the time. I think that people were a lot more afraid of drafting Russians back then. I think the relationships have gotten better, generally speaking, Vladimir Shipyshev aside. But I think that, they need to swing for the fences on somebody with some game-breaking talent. You look at the draft, and I don't know the name super well, but I know Cole Caulfield is a guy that's been thrown out a lot.
That's what
that
I've heard
everyone would really hope would fall to the Wild. He's not very big is the knock against him, which is why he would fall to 12. But that's a guy where if he falls to you, you can't hesitate in taking him. I thought Dominic Bach was a guy last year that was that type of player. And he went the next pick after the Wild to the Blues, of course. After the Wild took, another completely offenseless defenseman. And so it just, at some point, you need to identify what you have in your farm, what you have on your team. And, you do need to kind of draft to your strengths and weaknesses a little bit. You don't have a whole lot of game-breaking talent in your farm. You've got some guys you like. I mean, we all like some of the prospects that they have. But it doesn't mean that you've got that guy in your farm system, and you need to have more, no BS offensive stars. You need to draft guys that you think can play on your first line someday or second line someday, and they haven't done that consistently with their first round picks. I feel like even going back to Jules Eriksson, you drafted him knowing that he had an incredibly high floor. But not a super high ceiling, and it's just avoiding drafting players like that. Those are good players to have,
right?
But you have those players,
right?
already.
Those are good players to have when you're looking to maybe you're projecting down the road. Say you're in year 1 or 2 of having this elite level game breaking player, and you start to build around him. That's the kind of player you draft to help fill out a roster.
Right.
That's not a player you are going to put all your hope and trust into.
Yep.
And, no disrespect to Jules Eriksson, but he doesn't, as you said, he doesn't have that highest ceiling. He just has a high floor, which, again, it's more likely he's just a good like a role player to fill out a roster.
And maybe, he could carve out a career as a good middle six guy. But that's, and again, you need those, but you can't stockpile those. And I think that's what the Wild did for the longest time is they stockpiled, middle six type prospects. And, with the rare exception of Kirill Kaprizov and maybe Matt Dumba, I guess you could say. But they need to do better with the first-round pick this year. I mean, they cannot, as almost disastrous as it was to fall flat in your face last year with your first-round pick, it's even more so important this year to not do it again. And they have their first 3 picks for the first time, and I think it was 7 years or something like that, for the first time ever. I mean, they haven't had a second-round pick in God knows how long, since Jordan Greenway, like 4 or 5 years ago, I think.
That was 4 years ago.
Yeah, they haven't had a second-round pick, which was kind of, a running Chuck Fletcher joke. But they really can't screw it up. I mean, they really have to do as well with their entire draft this year as they did in rounds 3 through 7 last year, which we agreed was pretty good. So
yeah, the Wild have their first 3 picks. They have first round, second round, third round. Then we get into the 4th round, and they traded their 4th round pick in the Martin Hanzal trade.
Oh, that's right.
However, they did get the New York Rangers 4th round pick from the Boston Bruins in the, I believe that was in
Coyle
the Charlie
trade.
Coyle
It
trade.
got upgraded when they won the first round of the playoffs.
Right, and so to recap here, the Wild have in the first round pick number 12, which they moved down a spot.
Right.
Also, did you see the thing where the Wolves, they've never, moved up in the NBA draft lottery? They've always moved down, or, the one time they got number 1 overall, that's because they had the best odds.
Yeah.
And somebody tweeted out, the odds of that happening, is astronomical. And now it just, it feels like the Wild are going to get into the same spot where they're just never going to, move up. They're just going to always, stay where they're at or move down.
Yeah.
And then in round 2, they have the 42nd pick, which is also theirs. Round 3, again, Minnesota's 73rd overall. Round 4, they have the 99th overall pick, which is the 6th pick into round 4. And that was the New York Rangers pick that we just talked about.
They moved up in that round at least.
Yeah. Then
had to trade Charlie Coyle to do it.
Right.
But,
and then in round 5, Minnesota drafts 149th overall, which was from Washington and then from Montreal, which is I don't know where that was from. I'm looking that up.
Had to be
that was in the
Gustav.
That was the Mike Riley trade.
Oh, that's right, Mike Riley. I was thinking it was Gustav Olofsson, but I think they gave him away for almost nothing.
So the Canadians sent that, the Capitals sent that pick to the Canadians for Jakob Jarabek.
Sure.
And then 5 days later, the Canadians sent that pick to the Wild for Mike Riley.
Sure.
So that's where that pick came from. And the Wild pick in that round went to the Vegas Golden Knights in the 5th round.
That was the Brad Hunt trade. They downgraded from the 5th to the 6th.
Yeah, that was the Brad Hunt trade.
Yep.
And then the Wild have 2 picks in round 6. They have theirs at 166th overall, and then they have Vegas's pick again in the 6th, 172 overall, which again acquired in the Brad Hunt trade.
Yep.
And then they have their 7th round pick, which is 197th overall. So 8 picks in a draft for the Wild. So actually, a pretty full stock of draft picks, which is, really good if you love, having a full slate of draft picks, plus one, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So will be interesting to see. Again, I liked what Paul Fenton did in rounds 3 through 7 last year, where he picked players with a lot of high upside, as you've highlighted through our prospect watch throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then I just hope he does that in rounds 1 through 7 this year.
Right.
Just take your swing, man. Don't be conservative. If anything, the Wild history has been littered with conservative. What the team needs is a swing for the fences, home run cut. And, you could go like Fulton Reed in the Mighty Ducks. 1 out of 5, But if that one is amazing, then good on you. You did it. You nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, too, this team can rebuild with middling picks like this. And I know a lot has been made of this team not tanking, and that hurts, your chances. You're not going to get a Connor McDavid. You're not going to get an Austin Matthews. Yeah, that's fine. But, if we shift our mindset slightly here to the Stanley Cup final that just ended on Wednesday night, and you look at the roster construction of the St. Louis Blues, something I wanted to do when the season ended, they have one top 10 pick on their team, and it's Alex Pietrangelo, which you don't really think of as a top 10 pick, right?
He would have been like the 5th player I probably would have guessed.
Exactly. Vladimir Tarasenko, taken 16th. Jaden Schwartz, I think, taken 14th. Ryan O'Reilly, I think, was a middle pick in there somewhere. Jordan Binnington, 3rd round. Colton Parayko, Christ, I think he was a 3rd or 5th round.
Yeah, he was a late one.
And so, you kind of get upset with the Wild because, they are kind of this middle ground where they're not drafting anybody high. They're not getting the McDavids and the Matthews of the world. But you can build a winner using middle picks. And that's not to say that you can't do it other ways, too. Ryan O'Reilly was acquired in a trade. And so was Steen. Alexander Steen was acquired in a trade for the Blues. You can get those guys. And it's just it can't underscore enough how important the draft is and how important building through the draft is, and that's something that obviously Chuck Fletcher didn't do a good enough job of, which was one of the reasons why he was ousted.
I mean, I wouldn't say he didn't do a great job. Like, he did okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think his picks were too... Joel Eriksson is the perfect example. I hate to keep railing on him, but...
We like him,
yeah,
for what he is.
They were just high floor players, but not high ceiling. You know, and I think Mikhail Granlund might have been the only exception where we
Dumba.
really had in Dumba, we really have high ceilings for them.
Yeah,
but
that was it.
That's really been it, and and maybe Alex Tuck has a decent enough ceiling, but we never really got to reap the benefits of that draft pick.
No, and so even a guy like Luke Cunnin, where it's intangibles off the charts, but no one was ever going to accuse him of being a top flight scorer in that draft. And Joel Eriksson was a great example because Brock Besser was how many picks later, and that guy had top end talent and had nothing to do with the fact that he was Minnesotan. It's just you've got to be able to identify top end talent. You've got to be able to jump on it because that's what it takes to win in this league. And I've seen it said, and I still believe it, where, people for some reason have this belief that high ceiling players don't have high floors as well, or that they boom or bust more often than high floor players. And, in other sports maybe, but in the NHL, it just doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. It just doesn't seem to be where just because a player has a lot of offensive potential means that he can't be a useful player in the bottom 6. Because especially with the way the NHL is now, with the bottom 6, you're hoping to roll 4 lines and to be able to score from all 4 lines. And we saw a great example of that in the playoffs this year. I think, Boston's 4th line was a huge reason why they made it as far as they did. And so it's little things like that you kind of pick up on, and you kind of hope that the Wild are able to learn from the NHL and its evolution.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're expecting from the NHL draft next weekend. And the Friday of the draft is always one of my favorite days of the year because it just has so many. The trade mill is just always churning on that day, and between trades and the actual draft, it's always one of my favorite days on the hockey calendar. So that is something to look forward to. We will have more kind of coverage of that next week on the show, kind of recapping the Wild's draft picks and, if they had any other, correlating moves. They could move up or down in this draft depending on, players available. Will be interesting to see how many players they actually scouted with 6 scouts on staff, but you never know. Do we have anything else on our plate for the show? I guess congrats to the the Blues for rolling right into Boston and winning the Stanley Cup, and they just took a blowtorch to the Bruins in Game 7. I was just really shocked at... Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say they took a blowtorch. Jordan Binnington just annihilated the Blues. It's like Jake Allen gave him some of that secret stuff from the 2017 playoffs, and he just absolutely... could not be beaten at any point. And how many amazing saves did he have in that game to just, one, like, keep the Bruins in the first period because the Blues in the first period. The Bruins were all over the Blues, and I'm getting Bruins and Blues. That just no more all B's Stanley Cup final. It just amazing to see like how goaltending like that can just, especially in a win-all game, like just win it for you, because the Blues were just a completely different team in the first period than the Bruins. It was like watching the first game of Mighty Ducks versus Iceland, except Greg Goldberg wasn't in net. It was Julie Gaffney just absolutely taking every goal away. Mm-hmm. Do you like I'm just dropping all these Mighty Ducks references? I'm just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it's what people come to expect from our podcast.
Yeah.
Binnington was a really weird playoff run to me because you look at his overall stats, they weren't really all that good because it seemed like he was either completely standing on his head, like we saw in Game 7, or he was getting literally run out of town, like literally run off the ice, like was it Game...
Yeah, that was one of them, yeah.
Game 4. I mean, he was really hot and cold where it was like either he was unstoppable and only allowing a goal or shutting him out, or he was just getting absolutely annihilated. And so there really wasn't a whole lot in between for Jordan Binnington. It led to, looked like some pretty mediocre numbers from him. And it was just very interesting to me because usually when you see a hot goalie, like, they carry it all the way through and they play...
They won the Conn Smythe.
Right, exactly. And that's why he didn't win the Conn Smythe. His numbers weren't good, because he had almost a game or two every series where he got just lit up. And but then, you get that Game 7 performance out of him, and it's obviously all worth it. So really interesting playoffs. Obviously wasn't, I don't think, a playoffs to remember, just other than the simple fact that Tampa was the best team that the NHL might have ever seen. And they got swept in the first round. So that's probably the most memorable thing about this playoffs.
I've been so out of touch in the Stanley Cup final that I've just completely forgotten everything from the first round.
It's easy to, yeah.
Tampa getting swept, and then Carolina upsetting Washington in 7 games, and then you had the Sharks Knights fiasco of Game 7, which weird. The Knights throwing complete shade at.
I saw that.
The 5-minute major penalty in Game 7 was so wonderful. That was probably my favorite tweet of theirs. But, yeah, there was a lot of things going on in round 1 that you just kind of forget about. And, I think round 1 was very compelling, but then once you got into rounds 2, 3, and beyond, I think it kind of lost a little luster for me.
Probably did.
Just kind of with the upsets and teams that kind of moved on. It's...
And we had a 7-game Stanley Cup final, and it wasn't anything that was super memorable.
It wasn't,
like.
it wasn't like none of the games were really that memorable.
No. No, all the games feel like they were kind of one-sided even. I guess there were some games that had some good back and forth to them, but for the most part, it feels like a lot of the games were one-sided, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So
what do you do?
Yeah. What can you do? And there was an interesting debate on Twitter on Friday about is this market an NBA market or an NHL market? What more is favored, and because the ratings were just absolutely obliterated. Mm-hmm. NBA obliterated the NHL.
I think they had a lot more compelling series too. I think it's unfair to say this isn't a hockey market. Yes, the Wolves do better numbers than the Wild when they're good versus when the Wild are good. And that's fine. But I think that comparing the NHL final this year with the NBA final isn't particularly fair because the NBA was so much more compelling this year.
I will say, and just from my objective perspective, that say you have, like, you take, like, the Wolves and, like, say they're the best team in the NBA, and then you take the Wild, make them the best team in the NHL playing the same year, same time, and I think the Wolves still crush the ratings over the Wild. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong if we ever see that day happen. But
what a good problem to have.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I just always remember, like, the Kevin Garnett years.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Wild came in, you know, during that time. And I still remembered this just being, like, just a Wolves town. And, you know, even when Garnett returned, like, that was such, like, an incredible, like, day in, like, Minnesota sports, because it was just, like, it was so awesome to, like, you know, talk about the Wolves again, talking about the glory times and whatnot. And actually going to that game was just wonderful. So I don't know. You can yell at me all you want about it, but I'm gonna favor the NBA slightly in this town, and you can at me about it all you want, but the stakes, I guess they're even. Each league has had one team up and leave, and
Yeah, true. I don't know. I think this goes back to Minnesota hockey fans and the constant pandering that the team does towards us. I think this is a great hockey town, but the caveat to that is I don't know that it's a great professional hockey town. I think this
a lot of options.
This market has a lot of options. You've got a lot of really good college hockey being played in this state. Not necessarily on the U of M campus, but St. Cloud State, Duluth, obviously national champions. That's a huge, a lot of folks in the cities went to Duluth, and so there's a lot of that available. High school hockey here is better than anywhere else in the world, and there's really no debate of that. And so, that's an option too. There's a lot of people that would just as soon go to, their child's peewee game or a high school hockey game of their alma mater than watch the Minnesota Wild. And I think that was the case, and ultimately I think that's what doomed the North Stars. North Stars didn't have great attendance, and it's a little bit of a black eye, and maybe it's a little bit embarrassing for those who still love the North Stars and all they stand for, but the North Stars had pretty terrible attendance, actually. In 1991, they weren't a good team. They averaged like 7,500 fans a game, and that's pretty awful. That's Florida Panthers level awful. And you can say a lot about that stadium not being, up to date and all that, and the team was not good, and so it's just kind of, it is what it is. But yeah, I think this is a professional basketball town. They're third, and I think that's the case in almost every town across the country until you get north of the border, and it's just, you look at Boston. Who do they care more about, the Celtics or the Bruins? Probably the Celtics.
Oh yeah.
You go to Chicago. Do they care more about the Bulls, like when the Bulls were good? With Michael Jordan, maybe an egregious example, but are you kidding me? Like, the Bulls trump the Blackhawks in that town when they're good. Like, there was way more fanfare about the Bulls than the Michael Jordan Bulls than the Patrick Kane dynasty Blackhawks. Like, it just, yeah.
You can just
not even close.
You can wait for Eric to come back and he'll vouch for that.
But you know what I mean? Like, that.
Right.
That's just the case. That's just America.
And I did pull it up here, and you are pretty close to that. The 90-91 North Stars, their average attendance was 7,800 per
Jesus.
hockey database.
I was off by 300. Damn it.
Right. That's not good. The next couple years, they were 13.
Well, yeah, they went on the cup run and invigorated
yeah.
a lot of interest in the team. Yeah.
Over 13,000 the next 2 years, or their last 2 years.
Right.
Rest in peace. But yeah, that's it. So yeah,
yeah.
That's just an interesting debate. I just wanted to give my 2 cents on that as we just fill some airtime here to close out the show. But yeah. We're gonna go grill some food and then go watch Joe Mauer number retirement. So we are going to call it a show.
We're gonna go cry.
Yeah. We gotta go get some tissues on the way. Thank you for listening this week. Follow Ben at Ben Remington. Follow me at Giles Farrell. Podcast Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. At Zone Coverage MN or zonecoverage.com. For the written work that I've been doing in the last week. Had an article a day, going to shoot for that again here in the next week. with player reviews and draft coverage and whatnot, and any other kind of player moves that we might see here over the next week. So be sure to do that. And if you like what we do and like the written content as well, go to zonecoverage.com/subscribe and pitch in for a monthly or yearly subscription of the site. It does help not only us but everyone else on the network as well. So just a little bit of that promo for you. And if you do listen to this show, subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud. If you do listen on iTunes, leave us an iTunes ratings. Good, mediocre, or bad, we like them all. We just reserve the right to make fun of the bad ones later on. So, that will wrap it up for us this week, and we will chat with you again next week.
Later.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.